What's going on, everybody? It's Frito and Weagle back again for another meta discussion. We do this each time a new hero comes out, and this time, with the launch of Doomfist, I think we have a lot of great news, because we don't have to be umming and ahhing about whether or not he'll fit into the game really well, because I think we're all in agreement that he's sick at a lot of different things, but that also causes for a lot of debate and interesting conversation about the ripple effect that's going to have. It's going to have an immediate impact, kind of like a rocket punch to the face to the meta, but where does that leave the rest of the game? So, wherever you want to start off with that, Liam, let's jump right into it.
So I think the most interesting discussion around Doomfist is his capability to be a dive hero. We've definitely seen some conflicting opinions on this, so we're going to talk about what he's good at when it comes to diving, as well as what he's bad at when it comes to diving. Now, the pros getting use out of him as a dive hero at the minute is to put a Zarya bubble on the diving Doomfist in order to keep him alive for a little bit longer. His ability to get in the fight is definitely not the problem here. Getting in the fight, getting stuck in, doing some damage, that's not where the problem lies. It's actually, one, his hitbox, and two, the fact that it's not as easy for him to just get away and dodge abilities because of his hitbox, but also because of his escape tools as well. So he can get in and have a good fight, that's great and all, but what do you do when you get stunned by McCree, or if there is a McCree in the backline or a Roadhog? You've got this massive, great big hulking hitbox, and you don't necessarily have the tools to get away with it the same way you would with a Genji or a Tracer, who of course can run up a wall or swift strike away or blink, which is a much better evasive tool than what Doomfist has. There's also one other issue, and that's that Doomfist's abilities knock people all over the place. So if you're trying to run a coordinated dive comp with your Winston and your Genji, and you all dive into the same place like a dive comp should, and Doomfist is uppercutting people into the sky and punching them away, that doesn't really work for organized play specifically. I mean, it could do, and I'm sure he will be run in these contexts at times, but I think it's very easy for him to make it hard for the Winston to hit him if he's being uppercutted and punched away. Now, I'm sure Frito's going to dive into each part of this specifically, and I'm going to let him do that in just a second. I just think that he's also going to have some good utility for countering a dive comp, as well as also being able to be in the dive comp at certain situations. I think him as a dive hero is actually going to be more niche than people think it is.
Right, and I want to get specific into the things that you mentioned already. I'm going to compare him to Tracer and Genji. Tracer's hitbox is tiny, so hitting it with McCree, who's supposed to be a counter to Tracer, takes some outrageous skill set to do so. Her body is basically a pixel, and hitting that pixel as she's bobbing about can be quite difficult. And then Genji is only slightly bigger of a hitbox and has a get out of jail free card with Reflect, meaning that you physically can't hit him anyway, even if he's out in the open. And Tracer, of course, is blinking about and has a recall as well. Doomfist is devastating with his speed, but if you haven't played on the PTR yet, we've put a lot of time into testing this and watching how the pros play, he instantly gets punished if he ever has an open line of sight onto him, which makes him incredibly vulnerable when trying to either go out in open space or be overly aggressive, which is why I tend to lean towards his anti-dive mechanics like Liam pointed out. Now, what are those, of course? Well, one, as we just said with Tracer and Genji, really hard to hit, right? Well, as they're trying to do their damage to your backline, the rocket punch traps that you can do are some of the most reliable ways to get a kill on any character in Overwatch entirely. It's so hype and crazy. I know Liam might disagree with this a bit because he's, of course, a Tracer player. He almost didn't believe me when I told him this, how easy it is to punch a Tracer as she's trying to bounce about, because Tracers are so used to be able to dodge stun, dodge hook, but the way that rocket punch works, the hitbox is massive, and it comes out once he releases it so fast that you're not really going to be dodging it on accident. Whereas the other abilities, like, you can kind of almost dodge them without even trying sometimes. Rocket Punch is immediate and devastating right away and kind of wrecks those things. So to my mind, I don't see why Doomfist would want to play in a more difficult playstyle for him, whereas he can be battling those flankers in the backline. Now, even more importantly, possibly, because it's not just those characters that are the big mainstays of the meta, what's probably even more prevalent, especially if you ask pro players, we've had pro players on this channel that have vehemently said that D.Va is kind of an issue. Well, everything that Doomfist does, punches through defense matrix. All of his abilities other than his main attack, which isn't really even his main attack, right? It's his primary fire isn't what he's mainly doing. All of his combos and other stuff is what he wants to do. So it's not so much that he can kill D.Va quite well, but instead you have this very viable damage source that crowd controls D.Va, that stuns D.Va to stop her from using defense matrix, or knocks Winston about when he wants to dive in. Part of the power, or I would say actually the core of the power of dive comp right now is the synergy between Winston and D.Va, because D.Va can protect Winston at any time, as well as the rest of her team, of course, and Winston's bubble, with the big buff that it got, means that he very reliably has that circle of power, his safe space, if you will, that he could pop down whenever he wants. Well, Doomfist kind of disrupts that and really punishes overly aggressive dive play like that. So I wouldn't maybe go as so far to say as that dive would inherently die if Doomfist was there to counter it, but now I'm more excited about the capabilities of a Doomfist character to be able to prop up other heroes that you thought were unplayable otherwise, because that D.Va and Winston synergy was so strong. Playing a McCree, for instance, felt overwhelming and impossible. Well, if you're able to knock around those heroes that are just too threatening to McCree, right? Because McCree's biggest problem was he can deal with one flanker quite well, but not multiple angles of attack. Doomfist, I think, kind of solves that problem by enforcing the backline quickly, swiftly, and having this lethal threat at any time that allows for your team comp to sort of stabilize. This may even bring back Reinhardt, Roadhog, Zarya, tanks that are on the ground that you thought weren't playable before might all of a sudden become playable.
I think one thing, as you pointed out, that we disagree on slightly is his capability to punch a Tracer. I still think it's a fairly even matchup, but one thing I know we do agree on is how good Doomfist is against Genji as well. So I'm not saying he can't be in a dive comp. I'm sure he can be, and we'll see that. But let's just talk about this defensive play again. If a Genji uses his ult and swift strikes into your team before he gets a kill, Doomfist can punch him so far away in half a second that the Genji can't even keep swinging. He's already used his swift strike. He can't get back into that backline to do more damage. I've seen so many clips already of Genji's being completely and utterly denied by Doomfist in every conceivable way. He just gets fisted, punched away, punched in the air, or some kind of crowd control, and he's not even easy for Genji to hit. I feel like Doomfist Genji is one of the hardest kind of DPS counters that there is, because the only thing that really counters Genji at this point is Winston wrecking him. But with Doomfist coming in, I feel like as a one-on-one DPS, I think that Doomfist wins heavily every time, and I think that that counter potential is just stronger than his dive potential, especially with D.Va as well. Winston, I think Doomfist is good against. Just punch him out with the bubble as well. I think he's a much better peeler, if you will. Maybe he can be in the front line a little bit, but as soon as there's something in the back, I think going back in order to defend your team is going to see you better value than going in too far or punching things away from your Winston or your Genji. I think that they are better suited at their roles.
Also, it's kind of an issue with target prioritization, right? That we always have this shifting answer of which is the best target to prioritize in any given meta, in any given composition. It kind of changes from time to time, but when you have a Doomfist in your team comp, you don't really need to dive things because he has an insta-kill every 4 seconds, potentially, right? If you set it up right. So there's not really a need to go remove their healing necessarily, because healing isn't going to come into the equation, really, if you can insta-kill something. That's how it worked back in the multi-tank meta, where although Ana might be the centerpiece to everything, you have your own Ana who anti-nades whatever your Roadhog hooks, and there's no need to dive a healer because you just get man advantage and win that way. The Doomfist meta, I think, will kind of bring that back for it to be more frag heavy rather than target prioritization, dive heavy. I'm interested to see how that works out. Now, the thing against Tracer, right? This duel is so dense of information, it's kind of difficult to break down, but I think because he can have these large lanes where he can shoot past most of the map, it forces Tracer to play in a way she doesn't want to and creates another threat next to probably another crowd control threat that you could be propping up. So it's difficult to dodge both, but even more importantly, I think, is how Doomfist interacts in those moments where the stall is coming in. That's the biggest thing that's undoubtedly going to change. In a full 6v6 fight, sure, I can see Tracer dodging him most of the time, even though punches on a 4-second cooldown, and it'll eventually outpace Tracer's cooldowns, I think, because she gets a blink back every 3 seconds, and you probably need to use a couple blinks to get around anyway. Very quickly, you're going to start to notice that punch comes up, possibly even too much, and they might even nerf that at some point. But when there's in those 3v3 situations where Doomfist is commanding space on the point and the Tracer has to come back to contest it, every hybrid map, especially every 2CP map, or you're on those last points of a payload map, he just shuts them down. He has this big punch that's flying through the map. It's going to hit something, and especially if you have to contest the point, it's just like fighting into a Reaper. It feels impossible, and Doomfist is going to really change stalling on maps quite a lot. For the better, I would say, because I think we're all sick of the crazy stall. Mei, D.Va, Tracer coming in to stall the objective. Doomfist kind of shuts that all down, even more devastating than like a Sombra disable does, because the stun and the crowd control is so immediate and so easy to hit that your team can follow up on that crowd control quite easily.
I do think that that's true, but I also think, as we've said this whole video, Doomfist defensive is going to be good, and if you've also got Doomfist stalling the point out, then that also does add another dynamic, because I think his ultimate is incredibly strong. I think his ultimate is a guaranteed kill nearly every time, if not more than one kill. It's super strong. And if you're coming out with spawn and everyone's just trickling in, and then your Doomfist comes out with his ultimate, the enemy team have got to get off of that objective. The same way that if Doomfist is on attack, the defensive team have to get off that objective. So I think that in that way, he could also be good on the defensive side. And I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know if 2CP is going to be better now, or if it could just go the other way, where we've now got another stall hero. Because what are the best current stall heroes? D.Va, Genji, Tracer, Winston, Doomfist. You know, it's going to be really interesting, especially since he can punch people off of the point into the walls and all of that good stuff. Now, one thing about the Tracer and Doomfist matchup is all going to be about where you take the fight. Who's going to take the smartest fight? Because I agree with you. If Tracer fights Doomfist in a corridor, she's screwed. But if they fight out in the open, which again goes back to his dive mechanics, she has evasive tools. And if he misses his punch, his evasive tools just are not as good as hers. So out in the open, where she can't just be punched into the wall, maybe there's not even a wall that's close enough to be punched to, I think that there she has more chance, but in a corridor it's the flip side. So I don't think it's necessarily a counter, I think it's one of them 50-50 matchups, and Tracer's always going to have that. The Tracer's going to be very strong forever. She's always going to be strong unless they nerf her, because her kit's amazing. There's no one with better staying alive utility in the entire game. So her matchup against him I think will be interesting and very map dependent. Been trying to figure out in my mind where Doomfist will be best, and I'm sure there's some points where he won't be good. For example, probably Route 66, first and second, because there's so much open space there. But apart from a couple of maps that are like that, I think he can be used everywhere. Especially in matchmaking. I'm not sure what the pros are going to do with him. Maybe you need to answer that question. But for me, I'm not sure.
I'm interested to see how he works with his vertical mobility in some of those maps, because I try to theorize like a map like Gibraltar, right? Where first and second point, especially, even third to some degree, has a lot of high ground. Is the Doomfist's brawling 1v1 dueling capability and jump to be able to get to the high ground as good as like a Genji, to the point where you would pick him instead of Tracer on attack in order to do that? Or is his face just too squishy, where the hit scan playing from afar can just wreck him before he closes the distance? Obviously, like we said before, putting a Zarya bubble on him can kind of guarantee that duel, giving that couple seconds he needs to be able to charge up without taking damage. That's incredibly key, I think. The tanking pocketing with him is the difference maker in him being able to freely move aggressively into any point of contact. Whereas otherwise, if he doesn't have that, he almost always needs to play in a very guarded, strategic strategical style, almost in a similar way to like a Winston. It's going to depend the severity of the capabilities of that movement that he has in his kit, right? I don't think they're going to change his slam ability, which right now kind of lets you have incredible access to high ground because you can select it from a distance where you might not otherwise. Like if you're just on the ground, it only goes a few feet, but if you're in the air, it can go like a mile or something if you select it quite far. Players that are really sick at that are going to make him feel like he can move anywhere. And then once you start to enable that, maybe he's even better on some maps where you might think he's less good, but he's got to find those alleys of attack and those really small windows where he doesn't just get punched in the face from range, not even punched in the face, he punches people in the face, where he doesn't get shot in the face, where he doesn't bring a punch to a gunfight, where a soldier or McCree or any hit scan, Hanzo, Widowmaker, whatever, anything ranged can hit him so easily. And I believe I stressed this enough, I hope, but he's one of the easiest characters to hit while flying through the air because his hitbox is quite forgiving, I would say, or at least very obvious where you're supposed to be connecting. And making a character like McCree look good means he's definitely easy to hit because McCree's very hard to play right now.
Well, before we actually clicked record for this, I said to Frito, imagine Winston with half the health and no barrier. That's almost what Doomfist is. Yeah, he does more DPS, but if you dive in with that huge hitbox with no barrier to drop, half the health, you're giving yourself a difficult situation to get out of. You know, you've got to get a kill, get it quick, or else you're going to be losing value. If a Tracer goes in at the start, or a Genji goes in at the start, they have them escape tools. But when Doomfist is in, he is all in. But his hitbox is massive. I don't know what it is. It'd probably be interesting to see them side by side, but he must be 3 Tracers. A hitbox. He's way, way bigger than Tracer. His head is huge, and I just see him being not what people think most of the time. We've seen how people can play heroes in matchmaking, how the pros wouldn't ever dream of playing. It's completely different. So the ways you can play heroes and the style you can play them in is very varied over different ranks, over pro play and amateur play and semi-pro play, but I just don't think he's as good at diving as the current dive heroes. So what's the point in him doing that role when he does things in the backline that only Roadhog and McCree can do, and they kind of suck? I think Roadhog will get some kind of a change, and I don't think McCree needs one, because I think he's going to be good against Doomfists. Probably still niche. I'm sorry, McCree mains. I really wish that McCree would be in Soldier's position, where we need a hit scan. Let's get a McCree, because I think that's so much more fun. But I don't think that's going to change, but I do think McCree cannot miss the meaty head of Doomfist. I just think that it's a good stun target. And another thing, if a Doomfist gets stunned, he's dead. Your team are gonna focus him because once again, he's got that massive hitbox, but no shielding and half the HP of a tank.
He really needs that momentum in those duels, doesn't he? Because he needs those abilities to be hitting in succession immediately, whereas if he stops his momentum at all, he can't really fight his way back unless he insta-kills you with his punch. Yes, he does get shielding when he lands those abilities, but it isn't as strong as you think it is. It's a necessity for him to not die during those fights, whereas other characters can fully escape and get out of them. What I'm interested to see is, because I think he is both very strong, but also very counterable, where does that leave him in the overall meta? There's some theories that I have about that. Well, one is either that we get into this beautiful land of Overwatch where multiple comps get used, and it's well known that a Doomfist comp is sick against crowd-controlling dive, so that dive becomes harder to play. Maybe dive changes slightly to be able to interact with the Doomfist. Instead of having a soldier sometimes, maybe you put a McCree in there. Maybe that swaps around, or because Doomfist is so counterable himself, even if you play him in a defensive style, maybe he just ends up not getting played, right? Because part of the problem with the pro scene, a lot of the criticisms that's going on, Jeff Kaplan made that big post, obviously we didn't really cover it yet, but talking about perception versus balance and the fact that the stats don't really reflect the highest end of play, really complicated stuff, but ultimately what pro players are going to be doing is finding the path of least resistance instead of trying to make very risky comp decisions, because although Overwatch has a lot of rock, paper, scissors elements, what the pros end up doing is sort of defaulting, at least the Western pros, Korea is a bit more experimental, but is defaulting into very safe, stable strategies. So it might be the case that Doomfist is too counterable to the point where even if he's sick, he doesn't get used because it's a bit of a risk. Now, the big difference between that, for me at least, is that pro Doomfist's positioning can be insane. Although he can get insta-killed by all damage in the open space, it gets crowd control, all that, a sick Doomfist is never really going to have himself open in those windows of opportunity for the enemy to kill him for very long. Instead, he's going to play in a very safe, secure, and guaranteed way where perhaps then he's still good. So only time will tell with these things, but I think undoubtedly, because he can punch D.Va in the face, things have to change at the highest levels of play, and he's a fun character for everyone to play at all levels of play, because he's so hype.
I think that's the most important thing for me, is that they have brought out a hero that is strong. I mean, they did it with Anna, and then it turned out she was outrageous. I don't think Doomfist is outrageous, but I would rather he was too good and had to be nerfed a bit, than him being too weak and taking 6 months to be a good thing. Sombra's good now. Orisa, still not a fan, but Doomfist is probably, one of my favorite heroes in the game. He's right up there for me. I think he's amazing. And I said this to Frito, how on earth are Blizzard going to top this? How are they going to make a better hero than this? It's like a fighting game hero in Overwatch with combos. It's crazy. It really is.
There's so many more counters that we could go over, but really I think we'll wait to discuss it even more as this progresses. Obviously, a lot of people asked me what they think about Orisa countering Doomfist. Obviously, she doesn't get punched around. Sombra has an interesting interaction with him as well. Lots of complexity there, but I think the main issues were covered in this video today, and we're going to have to see how it develops and cover it more as Doomfist comes out. Hopefully soon. I'm a little worried because he's so buggy, and there's so many different things like his super jump or his launch jump when he goes up a ramp. I don't know how they're going to handle these things or the cooldowns in general, so it might be a little while till we see him on the live game, but I'm excited for him either way. Well, guys, if you enjoyed the meta discussion, please leave a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe because we upload each and every day, so you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link in the description to check out our Twitter and our Discord server where you can interact with our community and team up with a friendly Doomfist main of your dreams. That's been it for me. It's been Frito and Weagle for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.